Welcome, everyone. This is Ellison, and on today's show, we are going to be discussing what about the children support the mental health of our school age children, regardless if they're in elementary, high school, or college. We've heard, at least I've heard the saying a long time ago, it takes a village, right? And it still takes a village to help our children progress and be good citizens in society. So, with that being said, mental health is important to the overall health of our children. Mental disorders are chronic health conditions. They are conditions that last a long time and often don't go away completely. So that continues, these mental health conditions can continue the lifespan, right? Hey, Eric. So I just want to share this before I bring on my special guest that I have with me today. According to the CDC, they're saying that one in every six children ages 2 to 8 had been diagnosed with mental, behavioral, or developmental disorders. And mental disorders among children are described as serious changes in the way children they typically learn, they behave, or even handle their emotions. And it causes them to have some kind of distress and problems in getting through their day. So, with that being said, I have none other with me on today to discuss this topic is Dr. Charnetta Robinson.
Hi,
Good
Ellasin.
evening.
How are
Good evening.
you? Good evening. I'm doing well. How are you today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for asking. Happy New Year to you, ma'am.
Happy New Year to you. Welcome to 2023. It's
Yes,
unbelievable, right?
yes. Yes, and what a way to get started by seeing how we can help our children because our children are our future.
They are. They are. And we definitely have to be the ones to lead and guide them. So I'm excited about today's topic and ready to have some fun.
All right, all right. So listen, before we dive into the topic, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, please?
Okay, I always like to start that question, answering that question with a joke. I like to say I'm New Orleans created and Spelman educated. So
That's
that's my
cute.
little joke. But definitely have to give kudos to my graduate institutions, the University of New Orleans and Southeastern Louisiana University. So that's, my educational background. Definitely been between education and mental health for a long time. It's year 17, I think, now that I've been working between those two hats, mental health provider capacities. Also spent some time working in the school district doing human resources, as well as working with special populations in the special education department. So
Okay.
definitely committed to just the journey of how do we ensure that children can have the best mental health experience so they can have the best academic experience, and just overall life experience. So very
Yes.
passionate about it.
Amen. And that's what we need. We need the passion. Listen, listen. If you guys are watching, I need you guys to do what y'all do best. Comment. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know if you have any questions because we have the professional in the building and we're gonna do a thing on today.
Let's learn from each other. Learn from each other.
Yes. So let's dive right on in. Our schools, whether it be schools, daycares, after school programs, even churches, because they have like Sunday school and different programs for children. Do you feel they're prepared for children with mental illness?
I think that it's, not one entity being prepared. I think it's all of us working together. That's really
Mhm.
going to be key because, this is such a pervasive issue and such, something that's just really hitting us just with all of the different community and societal changes that we've experienced over the last few years. And so I think it's definitely going to have to be collaborative. And so we're definitely going to have to really stay in conversation with each other about what we're seeing in all of these settings so that we can help support one another. I
Yeah.
think that's really the best way to equip and be ready. We can't do it independently for sure.
So the saying "it takes a village" is not old.
Oh no, I think that that is alive and real, probably in one of the most authentic ways that we've ever seen it. Just because, the presentation of different symptoms and just responses to mental health challenges show up so differently in different environments. And so sometimes a child can appear to be just fine in one setting and really be experiencing something, really major, but they show it in another place. And so there has to be that ongoing dialogue between all of the stakeholders that are invested into these kids, and just creating platforms where we can share the information, platforms such as this, where just the community can come together and hear from each other.
Right, right. Yeah, I like that you said that. And Jeanette Stevens, she was spot on. She said it will take a village. And sometimes we feel, because my children are older, but it still takes a village, because we have neighbors. And again, if we're in churches, then we have those children in schools. So it takes all of us, regardless if we have birthed them or not. That's the
Mhm.
village that you're saying that needs to come together to support these children, right?
For sure, for sure. And I think that what we have is our unique experiences, So even if they are, birth children or not, different people have been in different educational environments, maybe lived different places, geographically. And so it's about this collective experience that we can really bring and share, and
Mhm.
really help to, cultivate an environment that supports the children. So yeah, definitely the village. We all have something to contribute.
Yes, yes, yes. And we do need to get back to community. So
Mhm.
being mentally healthy during childhood, it means that it allows them to reach the developmental and emotional milestones, and learning healthy social skills, and how to cope when there's a problem, different things like that. So we have to make sure the environment is set for our children, but sometimes we look at it, and Charnetta, truth is, everything ain't no they need to be whooped.
It's not. It's not. That's not the universal, response, and I think that happens because depending on, the environment that the parent was reared in, sometimes they only know that response. So I think a huge piece of this is really like the parent, first of all, recognizing where there could be some, things added to just their repertoire, and then also being educated on what are some alternatives. I think parents desire it, but sometimes, just always don't know how to respond. And then,
Mhm.
sometimes there's the compounding element of, if they are experiencing some mental
Right.
health symptoms, then it could also be difficult, to address the parenting piece during their
Right.
own personal struggle.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Listen, y'all talk back to me. Y'all put in the chat. It's not about the whooping. We gotta identify what's going on. It's not about the whooping.
No,
So
definitely not. Definitely
right.
not.
So with that being said, what are some signs and symptoms that parents, teachers, and other people in the community, um, that are involved in a child, that they need to be cognizant of?
Yeah, I think, like I said previously, I think that, first we have to remember that it shows, differently in different environments. But I think that, you can see a lot of different things. Children can become more irritable, when they're experiencing something. And so this once, sort of lively, happy-go-lucky child all of a sudden, is presenting with, different lack of patience, or just responding differently to siblings or even to their parents. So that can be an indicator. Lack of focus, in the classroom. Sometimes, they're distracted. I definitely, during my beginning years, into the profession as an eighth grade ELA teacher, that was one of the things that really sparked my interest in wanting to go further into mental health, was just how distracted children were in the classroom. So here you are trying to present academics, but they can't really focus in on that because there's so many other things going on. So I think that can be a clear sign, if you see grades just automatically, or suddenly decreasing, that can be an indicator for you. If children just withdraw in general, or isolate. They were once coming out into the common area of the home. They wanted to do activities at the church. They were excited about going to Sunday school, vacation Bible school, and all of a sudden, now they don't want to.
Right.
And that can kind of give you that warning sign. Something's not right here.
Right. And what you were just saying, it's like if they're persistent, right? And if, like you said, if it's interfering with the school, the home, play activities, then you may want to seek some kind of professional help. But, one of the things that I think about when it comes to environment, we have to make sure we pay attention to our children, right? We need to make sure we pay attention to our teenager. We need to make sure we pay attention to our college student if we're going to identify the symptoms that you said to be cognizant of, so that means that parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, whoever, you got to get out of your social media too. Right. I mean, this is real talk.
Yes.
We've got to get out of social media too. We got to get up out of everything's about us too and identify what's going on with these children. That's how we miss it.
Exactly. And of course, everybody has their day-to-day stressors and day-to-day schedules. And so it does take some effort to, figure out how to navigate this. I'm not suggesting that it's an easy task, but I think you're right. Having this home environment that really lends itself to family time, having, dinners at the table where you say, okay, let's leave the cell phones off the table, and let's actually talk to each other. You can go in a restaurant these days and you'll see a whole table of people just on their phones,
Man,
and so
listen, Dr. Robinson, hold that thought. Let's find out how many people are paying attention to what you said. I need y'all to type in there, be intentional, be intentional, be intentional. But you know what? You're so right, because I was just out with a friend of mine the other day, and I mean, we were chatting it up. And we were chatting it up, and before we know it, we looked around and we were like, oh, did they eat? Oh, wait a minute, because they were on the phone the whole time. When did this happen? Because everybody is even if you're in the same environment, they were in different spaces.
Exactly.
But in order to detect what's going on with my child, I have to be in their personal space.
Have to be, you have to be present. It's so easy to not be, because if you're tired, the electronic can just kind of keep them busy and you can get on with what you need to do. And I mean, sometimes they're doing purposeful things on the electronics, so I'm not anti-electronics, but I think there does need to be space for families, for parents, to talk with children, to understand who their friends are, to hear about, science class, what happened, what was a challenge today, and just really create the space where they feel comfortable having those conversations with you as well. And that sometimes takes parents a minute to get to that space. If I hear something that just alarms me, or it's a little bit inconsistent with maybe what I was used to when I was growing up, as parents, it can't be a freak out moment. It definitely has to be a conversation so that the children feel safe to come to you.
You're right. I like that you said that. Feel safe to come to you. And we have to create the safe environment. And I say that very strongly. And I also say very strongly with boundaries, just because I was one to allow my children to express how they felt. But let us be really clear. There was not going to be any kind of disrespect or anything else happening. So I hear you, and I want you to feel like you're heard respectfully. And I too needed to respect them. Right.
Exactly.
So with that being said, how important is early detection? Because COVID didn't just start the mental illness in our children. I feel like it brought more awareness, right? But along with COVID, we have the school shootings. We have a lot of different factors that are playing in our children fearing to be social. So how do we assist the children dealing with things like death and grief and even fear surrounding these events? And the second part of that is, what's the mental impact due to these tragedies?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. And, you're hitting that nail head on. It's not just one thing. That's what makes this just such a major issue, because it's all of these, factors working concurrently to create this society that is just, unprecedented. And so I think early detection is certainly important, because we have to then provide spaces where our kids can be supported. I think that, the pandemic created a space, especially for school systems, to really have to put this at the forefront. It illuminated this issue. So it's like where, you knew, okay, you needed some responses to mental health, and you'll kind of get it in there a little bit. It became, of paramount importance, as all of these things begin to take place. So yeah, I think the earlier you can respond to it, I think the better, because you're able to kind of steer them on a different path from that. I think another thing, it's important to, limit some of the exposure to some of the, things like social media, and also, just the news even, just because, sometimes it's presented maybe in a way that doesn't come along with explanation. And so if the parent, again, is not guiding that conversation, your children's perspective and their receptivity of it, can be kind of steered in a way that's not completely accurate. So we go back to, creating that space where you all are talking, so they can say, hey, I heard this, mom, dad, like, what do you think? What are your thoughts on it? And that conversation, it becomes an ongoing dialogue that you have some control, of.
I like the comment that, well, I like that one too, Jaquita, but I'm gonna come back to that one. I like the comment where Jaquita said that she's a true believer that parents set the tone, because we do set the tone. How are we wanting our children to talk to us if we're not talking to them?
Exactly. We have to model it for them. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Right.
It's oftentimes, you would hear kids like in the schools, talk about, like they would notice, like if two teachers say weren't getting along, and so it's important to understand how, I think I heard it said something like, more is caught than what is taught, and so not the things you're directly trying to show them. So that's in the house, that's in the church, that's in the schools. They are watching the adults. We're setting the tones, and we're on all the time. So even if you're the teacher, but it's Saturday in the grocery store, you're still that professional. You're still that teacher for them. You're still the pastor on Friday nights. When they see you out in the community.
That's right. Parents can better monitor their children's media device, knowing which social media outlets they utilize. And that is true. Listen, guys, you have been watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and we're talking with Dr. Charnetta Robinson, and we're talking about what about the children and their mental health. And she said something that I like, and I think we should all type in the chat and take the pledge. I am a role model.
I love it.
I am a role model. If you take the challenge and you're going to be a role model for whether it's your children, whether it's your school age children, whether it's your neighborhood, your church, say it. I am a role model, because we have to model these actions and these behaviors for our children. And so, hello, my name is Ellasin, and I am a role model.
So I'll follow you. I'm sure that I am a role model for sure.
Yes. So we talked a little bit about the home, right? But how do school and home environment impact the child's emotional well-being?
Oh my goodness, it's the foundation. It sets the tone. So much of how people interact, even as adults, with the world and with others, is based on their childhood experiences. A term that is very common in the mental health world is, adverse childhood experiences. And so you find people that, have had some of that, big T or little t, so big trauma or even little traumas. it makes a difference, and so sometimes, that's many of the adults that have in therapy. Some of what they're working on is trying to undo some of that so that they can set some different patterns forth, in their lives currently and with their children. So I think that it's important, again, to remember, it's about what is caught, and then also what is taught. What are you modeling for them? What are you telling them, is important? How are you defining emotions for them? Is defining emotions something you did growing up, and for some, that's not the case. I find that a lot of males that I see in my practice, one of the things that, we work on quite a bit, is just naming emotions, being able to identify them, know that they're there, validate them, and then work on any, restructuring and thinking if it's needed. And so a lot of that, those seeds that are planted for not showing emotions or just not knowing really what they are, a lot of that, can often come from your childhood experiences. So I think parents shape that. So, parents should be hugging their children. Parents should be saying, it's okay to feel upset in this moment. Let's talk about why you're upset, going back to that conversation.
Listen, I've been known to blow the mics out from screaming. And I'm trying to do my best to hold it in.
Mm-hmm.
But I so agree. We need to be hugging our children regardless of the age. And I believe people get misconstrued that when my child becomes a teenager, or when my child becomes a young adult, or my child becomes an adult, they don't need that, but they need that. We're just moving roles in their life.
Exactly.
But they do need that. They need that. And, especially from my men, it's okay to hug your boy child. We'll hug up on that girl. They'll hug up on that girl all they want to, but it's okay to hug that male child and let them know, hey, it's okay. So yes, hug your child. Hug a child today. Y'all type it in the chat. Hug a child today. Hug a child. Hug a child. Hug a child.
A child, an adult child.
Right.
You're so right. Yeah.
Hug. Listen.
Parenting definitely evolves and looks different depending on, if we're talking about young children or adolescents or adult children. But the parenting piece is still needed, I think, at whatever age your children, are at. And those loves and hugs are certainly needed at all ages. It'll just be, you'll be hugging, maybe for different reasons along the way, but they're still needed.
Hug a child. And there was a comment. It was a comment that Jaquita actually had said a while back, and she said about the parents, that the parents can make or break whether or not a child is comfortable enough to come to him or her. And that is so true. I don't know if you ever heard of this book. Well, it's a series that I recommend to some of my parents, and even though it's for children, we could still read it. And it's how to talk to kids so the kid will listen, and listen so the kid will talk. Right. Yes. So it's how to talk so kids will listen, and listen so that kids will talk. And it talks about how to help them deal with their feelings. Right. Which is really good, because when I grew up, shut up, stop all that crying, be quiet. Kids are seen. I mean, seen, not heard, all this stuff. So we were never taught to deal with our feelings. But this book talks about how to allow your children to deal with their feelings. The other thing I like about it is that it said something. One of the chapters talk about freeing them from playing roles. And sometimes we put our children in roles they should not be in. Right. Maybe if we don't have a male in the home, we're putting our sons in the male roles. Maybe if we don't have the wife in the home, we're putting our daughters there. We're putting our children in our adult business, and we're putting them in these roles. Can you tell me, how does this affect a child?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely greatly, because they are not provided the opportunity to go through the developmental stages appropriately. They're being thrust into another one, to which they're not ready for. And if we look at that from even, a neurological standpoint, there are certain parts of the brain that are not fully developed until certain ages. And so those parts where that are responsible for sort of the more logical reasoning and problem solving aren't even developed when you're a child. So expecting a child to make these really adult decisions, can really, be a pitfall, because they're just not wired to do that. If you go back, biblically, you're a child, you think as a child, when you get older, you
Yeah.
leave that behind. But it's so yeah, it can be pretty dangerous. And definitely have lasting impact, because there again could be that trauma element that's there, because they had all of these different responsibilities at times in their lives when they were supposed to just be freely experiencing the world. So that's where you have resentment and different things that come in for parents later.
Right, right. That's really good. And I think about sometimes if we're putting our children in roles that they shouldn't be in, we are allowing them to miss those developmental stages, right? But that can also impact them in schools, because now that's where you hear people say, "Oh, she too grown," or "He's doing, this," but what are we as the parent or the caretaker doing to put the child in that role to act that grown? And sometimes we have to also be careful with that, because we're not allowing them to grow how they feel or grow through how they feel, because
Right.
I'm feeling something. I don't know what it is, because I have to handle it adult way, but I'm not an adult. So isn't it
Right.
important to help our children to feel where they are, age appropriate feelings?
I think it is, their feelings and their emotions and struggles that they're facing, they have to be validated. They have to be told, that it is okay for you to be experiencing what you're experiencing at 13. And you can take some time and process that. And I'm here to support you. You don't have to worry about concealing that emotion because you're worrying about being present for mom or for dad, and so it takes constant validating that, and just reassuring them and making that space for them to have this full range of emotion. But they're not going to just automatically know it. So the parent's role becomes, in doing that. And again, I think that's where churches and other community groups can be really important, because that's where the parenting classes can be facilitated, with giving them ideas on how to do that. Because a lot of times, again, it's the how to. Parents may have the desire to do certain things, but it's the how to do this. How do I make space for this? This is all new. This is not what it was for me growing up. And so there has to be those resources available, those classes, those conversations like this, where they get opportunity to be exposed to this type of information.
Right. Right. Wow, that was good. I do agree that they have to learn how to grow through, so that they can also manage
Mhm.
different parts of their life. And I see that there was a comment by Dion. It says it's like they're being denied their own journey, and
Exactly.
that's so profound to me, because I
Mhm.
think of a GPS.
Mhm.
You have a destination, right? You don't just put nowhere in the GPS, or you'll be wandering.
Right.
But when we put a child in adult roles, it's almost as if we're setting the destination for them.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's
Mhm.
and their journey is uniquely theirs, and it's
Right.
not going to mirror their parents, because again, just like we've been talking about, look at all of the things that are so completely different
Mhm.
in this day, with the school shootings, with the pandemics. I mean, they're living in a different world. So their lived experiences are going to be different. And
Yeah.
subsequently, what they need, is going to look a little different as well.
Yeah. I want to jump on to, because it's important for parents to communicate with their children, right? But yet we hear so much about the children and adults even had social problems because of COVID. Now, if we were acting as that family, if we were acting as the person, if we were really communicating with our kids, do you think that would have helped us get through this a little bit more socially equipped versus I feel like everybody just scattered, even the ones in the house just scattered and went their own way instead of taking this time to get back to, and I was told, oh, you raising your family like the Bill Cosby way. Okay, well, we sit around the table and we talk. So
Right.
if everybody would have came back to, the Brady Bunches and the Bill Cosbys or whatever of it, how do you feel like that would have impacted us socially?
Yeah, I think significantly. I mean, I think it's, definitely important to recognize that, the pandemic was just something that I don't think anybody could have completely prepared for, not, in our homes or, collectively in organizations or schools, districts. I mean, it was everybody navigating uncharted waters, and so we have to acknowledge that. I think, though, what you're saying, just if the environment was structured in such a way where everybody did talk, if everybody wasn't so, plugged into devices and instead into each other, it just maybe would have provided some more of the space, to be able to really address how you were responding to what was happening. Because I mean, it was so much. It was responding to all of the things you're seeing on the news. It's kids having to adjust to, how to learn. Those that maybe had different exceptionalities, they were trying to figure out, how do I even learn through this distant platform, which created another barrier, maybe not able to receive their accommodations. It was just so much, the list could go on, of how they were impacted. So yes, I think, you saw people fare well or fare better that were able to, just really, again, be open about those emotions of like I'm scared. I don't know what to do, and just being able to really just embrace that in a very authentic way with their family.
Right, right. I like that. I like that. Y'all talk back. Structure, structure, structure. We got to have structure, structure, structure. Y'all give us, and listen, you watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and we have been talking to Dr. Charnetta Robinson. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let us know, and we will read it out. We'll discuss it, and we'll dialogue back and forth with it. So, I'm still thinking about this putting our children in adult roles, and I'm wondering if this is where the lack of respect is coming from.
I think so, because they don't know the boundaries. I hear you. Yeah. They don't know the boundary line because you just finished having a conversation with them like they were your peer, or they had a responsibility that would suggest they were more grown than what they are, and so then when you try to toggle back, to, okay, now do this, or, you're trying to give a directive, it's hard for them to go back and forth. Like those expectations of who they are and what their role is, has to be pretty consistent. And I just want to be clear, even the structure piece, I'm not suggesting that, homes need to be like boot camps. Like, structure could be being intentional about making time for fun and play. That's structure. Being intentional about, okay, on Friday nights we do the movies.
We used to have game night.
Yeah, that's structure too.
Yeah, game night, movie night, and I seen Jeanette say Uno. I love Uno, so we.
Oh yes, I love Uno.
Game night. We have movie night. We knew we was gonna go do things, and when you have multiple kids, it's important also to take that individual time because each kid is different. Right.
So
and
true,
we
Ellasin.
talked about some symptoms and everything earlier, but you have to know your child for that child, not comparing them, because every child is different, right? So I wanna say that Jeanette said parents allowed children to call them by their first name. I will never understand that. I had somebody say, "Oh, say hi, Ellasin." I said, "No, it's Miss Ellasin."
Oh yeah, that's a thing too. Like, people not saying, that their children have to say miss to an adult. That one gets me every time. But yeah, we're not gonna do that.
Right. So listen, Charnetta, do you think that mental health should be part of our school curriculum?
Yeah, I think in some way, shape, or form. I'm not suggesting that everybody has to know, the nitty gritty of, all the terms and things. But I think having a general knowledge base and just, general framework of what different things would look like, knowing warning signs of depression or of anxiety, or even of suicidal behaviors, just kind of knowing those general warning signs can be really helpful, I think, for teachers and other just stakeholders in the community, because when you do see something, you can say something, and then these students can be brought to the appropriate professionals to kind of deal with it further. So yeah, I mean, I think definitely, certainly in teacher prep programs, there definitely should be some curriculum that does relate to mental health. I know in a lot of the schools there are, some of the social skills training. Some of the counselors, are able to go in and do different lessons with the children, just on, some of the basic ways to increase their interpersonal relations, their ability to do conflict resolution. So they're definitely, I think it's on the brain, in these different settings, but it's certainly, the school can't do it all. And so some of these things too can be reinforced in churches, in community groups. The reinforcement of it is what makes it the norm for the children.
Right.
It's going to be what makes them call it to their attention when the scenario presents itself. The more and more they see it.
The village.
The village. It goes back to it.
The village and the role model. The village and the role model. Right? The village and the role model. Yes, that's important. Eric says, I think it would help for children to expand their emotional vocabulary and learn how to identify, them within themselves. And that goes back to us as parents, allowing first of all, we got to identify our own feelings in order to help our children. Right? We can't be smoking a cigarette, blowing in their face, saying don't smoke. Right? We have to be role models. Remember, y'all on here, y'all took the pledge. Hi, I am a role model. We have to be role models. So if I can't say to my daughter, right now, actually, I'm going to say this. I say stuff to my daughter like, what, actually right now, you not cleaning your room is triggering me. Right? Because she knows that I like clean. So to tell her that it's triggering me is letting her know that I am becoming aware of how I'm feeling, and I need to let you know how I feel so we can do something about this. And it's allowing her to know that, what, if you can come to me and tell me, am I doing something to trigger you, or whatever the case may be. But we have to create this dialogue for the children to be able to come to us. And we also have to allow them to feel. They are people too. They have feelings.
They definitely do. They need to be able to, and expanding the vocabulary, I do think is key. Like knowing what those different emotions are. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes in certain family units, doing that is not common. So parents may not have grown up doing that, and so it may be for them to learn different vocabulary as well. Some of one of the most common emotions that people express tends to be anger. They get mad, but there's often so many underlying emotions to that. And, and that's a longer process to peel back those layers to really identify those. But I think it can be helpful to start to get children to explore what some of their other emotions are. Like, you're not just angry, like maybe you're worried, maybe you're you're nervous about something, and just getting them familiar with just those other emotions that are in there instead of just the go-to anger.
Right. I agree. And you know what, you guys, you've been watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and we're talking about what about the children and their mental health. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share this out, because we are trying to create a village to help our children. Charnetta, listen, for most of our viewers, when you said anger, I'm sure they smiled, because we have learned that being angry takes 5 minutes off your life every
Mhm.
time you're angry,
Mhm.
right? So we've
Yes.
learned that here on Real Talk. The other thing is anger is a default emotion, right? So give your child that time to say, okay, you know what? Let's discuss this.
Mhm.
What was going on before you were angry, right? Maybe somebody hurt your feelings. Maybe you were sad. Maybe you couldn't control something. Help them identify the reason why they are angry and let them learn to talk it out. This will eliminate a lot of outbursts.
Mhm.
This will eliminate a lot of just being built up and then, verbal hostility. Allow your child to express themselves and help them. That means we have to learn as well,
Mhm.
right? So,
And that might mean some, yeah, emotional regulation for parents as well,
yeah,
because
yeah,
again, we go back to
yes,
that modeling. So you have to explore it, practice it, and I think it can be helpful to just be open and honest, letting your children know, I'm engaging in this process with you. I'm trying to learn how to regulate my emotions too. I think that
right.
that can bring some authenticity to that process that can be helpful to children.
Yes, I agree. Patrick said, "What are some resources to help children understand their feelings better?" I know the book is a series, and you can get it on Amazon, I'm sure, because Amazon has almost everything.
Mhm.
That's the one about how to talk so kids will listen and listen so that kids will talk. That's the name of it. That's the name of a
Mhm.
series, right?
Okay. Yeah, and
So
I'll just add
can
like
somebody
just
type that? Can somebody type that in for me? It's how to talk so kids will listen and listen so that kids will talk. Somebody type that in there for me, please. Y'all let me repeat it one more time.
yeah, it's kind of lengthy.
How to talk so kids will listen and listen so that kids will talk. Okay, it's a series on that, and it's got some phenomenal stuff in there. And the one I mentioned about is how to deal with their feelings, how to free them from playing roles, different things like that are in that series. So that's one. Charnetta, do you have
Mhm.
anything?
I was just going to add, just on a very basic level, the feelings wheel. You walk into any therapist office that you're mostly always going to find a feelings
Yep.
wheel. And it's one of those kind of basic tools that I think are really helpful, even when people get into the most, deep issues and they're really trying to find words. It can be helpful just to help them begin to name those
Mhm.
emotions. And so the feelings wheel guide you through getting from that most basic, and it kind of shows you how to go to each level, just
Mhm.
exploring the depth of that process. So anytime
Yeah.
you're doing like introspective work, but it's called a feelings wheel. And I
Yeah.
think that it's a perfect kind of go-to, and there are different variations of it. So like there's the more
Yes.
kid friendly one, and yeah.
Yep. I have one in my office, and you'd be surprised how many adults I send over there to that feelings wheel. Because
Right.
we say I don't know, but we learned again on that Real Talk with Ellison that I don't know is not how you describe an emotion. We just
Mhm.
have to take the time. So
For
I asked
sure.
you about school, mental health being part of the curriculum. The other piece is how, if we put something in place, right? And I don't know what it is. That's why I'm saying something. If we put something in place that will help not only the faculty, the staff, the teachers, and everything, but children, the children in the school understand mental health better. Do you think that it will cut down on bullying,
Mhm.
and it'll help with behaviors? Because now I'm feeling
Mhm.
understood.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I think that one of the reasons we see so much of the, inability to regulate emotions, inability to solve conflict is because they don't have the ability to. They don't know, So if you provide those opportunities to educate and give them tools to use, they can learn some breathing strategies. They can learn some different tools to have difficult conversations. They can learn how to be more mindful. All of these different things. It's not just something they would naturally know it. They have to be exposed to it. So I think as, we develop programming both in schools and in the communities to really expose the children to this, and this becomes more of their norm, and then, like we've said, it's reinforced everywhere they go, then it becomes more of just a natural response to the situations they face. I also think it allows them to have a certain empathy for their fellow, friend or fellow student, because
Yeah.
they begin to really understand the impact, of what some of their words can do. These children are growing up, so ingrained into the social media era, and so there's this instant spread of whatever they do, whether it's positive or negative,
Right.
um, and so, like, just really understanding more of those really interpersonal and just like kind of live interactions that aren't really as much of their reality.
Yeah.
And so I think they kind of lose like what that impact really
Yeah.
has on their peers emotionally. So I
Right.
think,
Right.
yeah, I think having some of those programs will just bring some of that back, them really being able to empathize a little bit more readily.
Right. And that empathy is so important because, you know, empathy and understanding, because you it's, and you might not totally be able to understand, because I mean, we're asking a child to understand a child with mental
Mhm,
illness, but
mhm,
they have the ability to understand that that child is different.
mhm,
And just
mhm,
because they're different doesn't mean that we have to bully them, or doesn't
mhm,
mean, that we have to talk down to them, be condescending,
mhm,
shun them, cause them to isolate because of our behaviors. So this is why I'm asking if we think it's important for schools to implement this some kind of way
mhm,
into the children, so that they can understand that just because Ellison is different, you
mhm.
don't have to socially isolate from them.
Right, right. Yeah. They begin to feel more confident about relating to, children with exceptionalities. And I think, that will continue to evolve as more opportunities for, maybe children without any exceptionalities. They're giving opportunities to work with, their peers who may have some exceptionalities. And so they can then begin to see, the gifts that each of them bring. I think we have to facilitate more of those
Yeah.
opportunities where they see, their uniqueness, and that they still offer something to the community. But again, I think just because there is a sort of a separation, or they never have the opportunity to interact in a lot of instances, they're just not familiar with it.
Right, right. We need to teach our children, no matter what, to accept their own
Mm,
uniqueness, right?
correct. Yeah,
Because we are
sure.
all uniquely made. We are all
Mhm,
fearfully and wonderfully made as well, when we're
mhm,
all
mhm,
unique, right?
mhm,
And regardless to if I have a mental disability or not, I'm still unique. So accept me for who I am, and by you accepting me, could very well decrease some of my behavior, because how much of this behavior is, hey, somebody see me, somebody hear
mhm,
me.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, if you feel validated, and you feel that what you're going through, somebody else can relate to it and understand it, first of all, you're more inclined to talk about it. You're more inclined to be able to like open up and share. And so, yeah, I think this developing programs like this allows, again, going back to just creating that space where people feel safe enough to share what may be, bothering them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear you say space, right?
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if, because I also was in the education field, and sometimes we created, for our children with behavioral, issues, or emotional or mental disorder, we created like a little space. We had
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
beanbag chair, we blocked it
Mhm.
off with like one of those big boards.
Mhm.
How important would a space be to let them just take a moment? Just take a moment to
Yeah,
do it.
I think that would be huge, and I actually believe there are some, schools that are beginning to create that, like just kind of a mindfulness room, especially, a lot of students with different exceptionalities sometimes have, sensory issues and sensory overload. So being in the regular classroom just with the lights, can be something that impacts them adversely. And so, yes, having this other room where they can just kind of have a timeout. And when I say a timeout, not in a negative way, but just a break. We know as adults, like sometimes it's like, okay, that's enough human interaction. I need a break. I need to recharge. I need to be, process my thoughts and then come back. And so I think that that's the same for children. I think parents can provide that even in the home too, allowing your children to have space where they, just can go inward and reflect, not just allowing them to do that, allowing them that process time. And, every child will be different on what they need. But I think that that's a normal progression, like of everyone to kind of need that at moments.
And we can implement that, because I know one of my children, she's difficult in articulating exactly how she feels. So I'll say to her, do you need a moment? I'll give her that space to take that moment, and she needs to articulate it. Eric says we can't be ashamed or too proud to ask for help for our children's mental health. Yes, especially our culture. I know growing up, man, listen, the counselors was the devil. Better not go. You're gonna lose your job. I mean, they painted this picture of the counselor like, man. So nobody went to counseling. So that kind of spills over to, now we're embarrassed or prideful or shameful that our children are going through this, right? And that's why being aware of what your child's behavior is so important, because at one time it was everybody had ADHD. Everybody had ADHD. Know your child, right? Is it more than that? Because we know ADHD can mimic some other disorders, but if you don't feel comfortable, don't just stay there, but get a second opinion, but get your child some help. Remember we said, Charnetta, it's not about the whooping.
No, it's not about the whooping. And like, if you're noticing, like those signs I gave in the beginning, any of that, take those warning signs seriously. I know that there's, people have thought, in the past that, if I mention, thoughts of harming, then that's going to bring it into the child's mind. No, it doesn't bring it into anyone's mind. If you're noticing something that looks like self-harm or looks like, possible suicidal thoughts, really addressing that, getting support for that, because I think that's, better than the alternative. So really taking it seriously. And I also think, in terms of the stigma, I think, if we can identify sort of one positive that has come from all of the different things that we faced, as a society, as a world, it's eradicating the stigma. Like, people are, getting therapy. It has skyrocketed, in this post-COVID world, like, from individuals to children to couples. Like, people are recognizing, I need to address this. If I want to live and be my best self, like, it's okay to come and talk to someone. And so I think that the stigma is definitely being eradicated these days, which is an amazing thing.
Yes,
especially, within our community.
That's right. It is. So let me ask you this. Instead of parents, some parents, right, they don't allow their children to figure it out. Right? They want to just jump in there and make it better right away. But how important is it for them to guide them, give them advice, help them, and to continue to accept and reflect on the child's feelings versus always just attempting to make it better for them, but to let them learn how to make it better too, work it out with them?
Yeah, I think that goes, back to the developmental process. You over time, as parts of your brain, develop being able to do those more higher order thinking process, you have to also be able to practice doing them. And so I think that there definitely is power in the struggle. I know one of the things that waved kind of through the education world a few years ago was just that, like, not jumping in to help a student solve a math problem, but letting them kind of sit with it and wrestle with it. I think that is a great illustration for life in general. Of course, not pain to your child, but if there is a problem or something that they're trying to wrestle with, here I go with my space word, and not in a physical sense, but just, in a proverbial sense, giving them the space, giving them the time to come up with their, novel ways of approaching whatever that particular issue is. That strengthens them intellectually in the long run, and emotionally. I think it gives them some mental toughness.
Right, because now I learned how to figure it out versus being codependent on or dependent on someone else. Right, I learned how to figure it out. I can figure it out. I don't have to go from my parents to my girlfriend, boyfriend, or to this one or to that one, or even a therapist. I'm learning to figure it out. I'm identifying my feelings. I'm learning to figure it out, right? So you guys have been watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and we have been talking to Dr. Charnetta Robinson. She has been dropping some nuggets on today. You guys have been greatly involved, and we just definitely appreciate it. We have been talking about what about the children and the mental health with the schools, right? And how we can help our children at home. The environment plays a major role in that. Right. And Charnetta, with that being said, children, this is what I feel. Children don't need their feelings agreed with. They need to have them acknowledged. Right. So what I mean by that is not, instead of saying, right. Okay. All right. Acknowledge it looks a little different than just the So what are your thoughts on acknowledging your children's feelings?
Yeah, I think it needs to be more than the because they don't know what that means. It's not clear. I think that your communication with your children should always be clear, and so if you have to put away distractions to be clear, then I think you should do that, So having those important conversations with them without, a phone in front of you or some other distraction, being present, being in the moment, saying things to them like, I hear you, that's rough. I could see that. Okay. Having some verbal responses that indicate, I am validating for you how that must be tough. And then from there, it facilitates further expression from them, further sharing. They're able to, feel like, okay, this is a safe space to come to. That validation contributes to that safe space.
Yes. Shalita says we need to hear them, not just listen. And that is true, because in hearing, listen. First of all, I want to go back to, and I want all of y'all to put in the chat, put the phone down.
Yes,
put the phone down. Put the phone down. Anyway, so with hearing our children, hearing looks a little different, because hearing is going to come with a change. I'm hearing you. So for instance, one time, we would make fun, and we would say something to my son. We would be like, XYZ, ha ha ha. We would all laugh about it because it was funny. But he said, I don't like that. And when he said that, we heard him. So we stopped joking about it, right? But sometimes our kids say, well, I don't like that. You don't know what you like. That's what I heard anyway. You don't know what you like. Yes, I do. I don't like you saying that. So to hear our kids and, creates a behavior. Talk more about hearing your kids. And then I want you to give us a tip.
Okay. Yeah. I think just when you do those verbal and both nonverbal things, that show them that you are listening, it validates that their emotions are real. It validates and shows them that you are interested in the journey that they are going through. And so you can do that both verbally and non-verbally. So it's important to be mindful of how sometimes you may not be saying anything, but your actions could be communicating something to them. So just kind of keeping that in mind. And as far as a nugget, I would just say be present. That's my biggest thing. Don't miss life's moments. Be in them.
Be present. That goes right with what Jeanette said about put the phone down. And I can't remember the best, but I know it was be intentional with your gift, because yes, our children are gifts from God. Put the phone down and talk to your gift from God. So Charnetta, you said be present. Be present. Just like we as adults want somebody to be present and be there and be emotionally in tune with us, that's the same thing that we have to do for these children. I say our children because it takes a village. And remember, y'all took the pledge. I am a role model.
Everybody, yes, it is, Ellasin.
Yes. So when we acknowledge our children's feelings, we do them a great service. We put them in touch with their inner reality. We let them to know that their feelings are real. When we tell them what they don't feel, now how are you telling me what I don't feel is real? So when we put them in touch with their inner reality, and once they're clear about the reality, they can then gather their strength and they can begin to feel more. They can express their feelings. They can cope, guys. And this is what we want from our children, to be able to cope with or without a mental disorder, because you can still cope if you have a mental disorder. We just have to be present.
We have to be present. Yes, and definitely be a support to our kids, be there for them, and just rely on the community. We're all in this together for sure.
We are all in this together. And Charnetta, I just appreciate you so much for being here on tonight.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
My hubby was the first guest, but you were really the first guest on Real Talk of 2023. And I just want to just say thank you so much for being here. You guys have been watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and we have had none other than Dr. Charnetta Robinson here that has been giving us some great nuggets, and she dropped some tips on how to identify symptoms and different things in your children. The most important thing that I want y'all to get away is be present.
Be present. Be present.
Be present. Yes. So Charnetta, hold on. We'll be right with you. Okay. So listen, guys, we're not going to stop here. Coming up on Real Talk with Ellasin, my next guest is also in the education department, and she's going to come on here and she's going to give us a perspective from teachers and the viewpoint through a teacher in the school, how to actually get involved, how to actually notice some things, and how we, the village, can help these students. So she's coming on, and then the week after that, we're going to talk with someone from the correctional facility or who has been involved with the correctional facility. They're going to tell us how we can perceive, how they perceive we can help our children not end up in the system, or even how to reacclimate back into society. So that's coming up the next few weeks in January. February is Black History Month, and on Real Talk, we are going to be doing Black history with a twist, and you are not going to want to miss this. So listen, guys, thank you so much for tuning into Real Talk with Ellasin. Please share. Don't forget to subscribe so you can also continue to get our shows as we educate the community. And our goal is to enlighten the community as a whole, right? So thank you so much again, Charnetta. I appreciate you. Thank you guys so much for watching Real Talk with Ellasin, and I am Ellasin. Happy New Year and God bless. Thank you.